I was a lowly auditor down the street. I'd come up here at lunchtime and I'd actually stand in the balconies and watch trading. I couldn't think that many years later I'd be back here. This is the greatest place I've ever worked.
Hello, I'm John Janarone, Editor-in-Chief of IPO Edge. Very happy to be back in New York City at the New York Stock Exchange. Today is the inaugural Private Equity Capital Markets Summit, and I have with us Tad Nacheff. Tad, tell us what's going on today.
Well, thank you. Well, today we're doing our first Private Equity Capital Markets Summit. And the premise of this is really to pull together capital markets team from private equity, along with our portfolio companies that could at some point in time go public. It's really different when a private equity owned company goes public, because once they're already public, then there's a period of time where that sponsor will own a lot of the company and have to take some extra steps as they sell down through that process, which is very different than what happens in venture capital.
Interesting. Now, Tad, something that we're going to talk about in Palm Beach actually in a couple of weeks when you're at our conference. These companies that are private equity owned, are they somewhat, I shouldn't say somewhat, are they much better prepared than a typical company that's, say, family owned to go public because of the reporting they have to do to the sponsor?
Well, they tend to be much more mature.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been take privates. So they might already have an investor relations system in place, a communication system in place, a forecasting system in place. So yeah, that's usually the case.
Gotcha. So Tad, tell us a bit about what's on the menu today. What kind of panels have we got in store this afternoon?
Certainly. So the first two panels are going to cover, first is preparation. So what is behind putting together the systems, the accounting, the legal, et cetera, to go public.
Yeah.
The second panel is then going to cover the actual attracting investors, the investor day, testing the waters, et cetera. And then the third panel is what makes this unique. That's the whole sell down process. So for that panel, we've got Ashley McNeil, who runs capital markets at Vista. We're going to have someone who's an expert on indexation. S&P Global is going to be there to talk about targeting. We'll have an IRO that's been through that process as well. Then we'll come down to the closing bell, and then we'll wrap with two very good keynote speakers. Our first keynote speaker is Glenn Schiffman, who's the CFO of Fanatics. Glenn has been a public company CFO, private company CFO, and a very successful investment banker. I actually worked with him way back when at Lehman Brothers. And then our final speaker is Frank Bisignano. Frank is the CEO of Fiserv. Frank was the CEO of First Data when KKR owned them, and they executed a $2.6 billion IPO back in 2015.
Great. Now, Tad, if I can, a bit of your own personal history. We were just chatting in the green room here.
Yep.
You've been in Wall Street your whole career.
Yep.
Tell us about your first experience in New York Stock Exchange way back when.
Sure. So before I actually became a salesperson, which I did for 30 years, I was a lowly auditor down the street. And, there's a fair amount of dead time in that job. So I'd come up here at lunchtime and I'd actually stand in the balconies and watch trading. And so obviously that was in a pre-9/11 world. So I'm starting to date myself a little bit, but it's pretty cool. And, certainly I couldn't think that many years later I'd be back here.
Yeah.
And then, in a very interesting role here, but it's a spectacular place. I've always loved stocks. I've always loved markets. And I'm just really, this is the greatest place I've ever worked.
I love it, Tad. Now, Tad, just tell me if you can, look into your crystal ball. So 2025, other advisors, investment bankers are telling me it could be a banner year for IPOs.
Yep.
How does it look like in your world with these PE-backed companies?
Yep. So I'll talk about a couple things. So far this year, we've had $7.6 billion, including today. Ingram Micro just listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It's opening shortly. Today, Ingram Micro listed. So far this year is $7.6 billion out of private equity. Last year was $4.5 billion. I think next year will be multiples of that $7.6 billion. And the toughest thing that I battle with, and you see guests on CNBC, for example, and say the IPO window's dead. The IPO window is not dead.
Yeah.
People are fixated on 2021 when you had upwards of $140 billion in capital raised. 50 billion is about a normal year. Okay.
Yeah.
This year we were tracking to 45-ish. The election notwithstanding, that might be held back a little bit, but I could see us eclipsing that 50 next year in total. Private equity, probably about 2/3 of it.
Wow. All right. Well, Tad, let's leave it right there. I'm excited about attending the conference this afternoon, and I'll see you over there.
Well, thanks for coming and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tad. I'm John Janarone of IPO Edge signing off from the New York Stock Exchange.